So I guess some interesting observations. The current admissions process to higher education needs reforming. And we've had one attempt at it fairly recently, post-qualification admissions. A lot of people were very enthusiastic about it. I think it actually, I'm kind of glad it's fallen away again, because actually what it would have done would put even more focus on qualifications being the only arbiter of what you should be doing next. And in those systems where there is PQA, what you generally find is it's all about the exam and no real reflection at all about anything else. So that may not be a particularly popular view, but that's my experience of 30 years and having seen other exam systems that run that sort of thing. So we do need to identify a way forward that begins to recognise that it can't all rest on a set of numbers. And there is, I think, enough of a sense that universities are struggling to get traction with people like me who have to go away and try and figure out how we're going to deal with 24,000 applications and when you've got 3,700 beds to fill. So I think that's a starting point. I think there's also a need to recognise, and this may be where there hits a challenge with this sort of idea, UK universities aren't just interested in UK students. And you're going to need to have a system that can also capture this for international players. But that actually might not be as difficult as you think, because as we've heard on a number of presentations today, many international systems feel that what the UK does is ridiculously narrow and focused only on a set of qualifications that people do at 16, which hardly happens anywhere else in the world at all, and then a much narrower focus on what people are doing in 3 subjects typically at the age of 18. So again, I think we're in a position where if it looks like actually the UK is aligning itself more broadly with what generally happens everywhere else in the world, that's probably not a bad thing either for UK higher education if we're reflecting on that. And you know, because organisations like the International Baccalaureate have a very strong base in the UK, you have got organisations that you can work with and consult with to try and develop this sort of portfolio idea. I guess the final thing, and this is probably the one where we face the greatest challenge, is there will begin, as I said before, there'll be places that lose out on this. And which universities feel that this is worth pursuing because actually they see the value in it, and which ones feel threatened by it because it undermines what they currently have going for them, I think is going to be one of the biggest challenges. And I suspect, you know, part of my contribution to this debate is I am at one of those universities that currently benefits immensely from the current structure, but that doesn't necessarily mean we couldn't benefit from something different. A lot of what we are trying to do at Cambridge is get some other information other than what we get through the UCAS application. We have a whole separate application form that we ask students to fill in. If we aligned it with what the portfolio is asking, well, actually, that kind of does the job for us. We wouldn't need to be spending our time then gathering that information in a different form. So I think there's opportunity here.
Thank you very much. Straight over to Vanessa.
I'm really not very good at stand-up here. Yeah, thank you. Maybe I can have a learner profile. One of the things I think that has really resonated with me throughout the whole of today is the number of connections through where I've been speaking with people and seeing that employers need to probably do more. And there needs to be more of a partnership between educators and employers. One of the things that we've been talking to Peter about is how can we use this learner profile? How can we trial it? How can we put that into our systems and our processes for recruiting our new trainees and other people in our early careers? We spend an incredible amount of time and effort going through an assessment process that looks very much similar to the learner profile. How are we going to understand the people coming to us and what their skills and dispositions or attributes, as we call them? I think that there are opportunities for us as employers, and I feel very lucky to be in the firm that I'm in, because I have a really amazingly supportive senior leadership team, and we have some of the funds to be able to put our academy together and to be able to do the things that we do. But if we had this kind of learner profile for every single employer, then I think we would have much, much better outcomes when we're looking at skills. The other thing I think that I reflected on was as part of my learning or part of my, my research before I came to this meeting today. I looked at the Times Higher Education Commission, the Times Education Commission interim report. And employers are crying out and saying, we want our young people to come into the world of work with these skills: creativity, oracy, common sense, resilience. Well, maybe we need to think about how we can help to create opportunities for employers to be more part of the education system. Thank you.
I think I've still got one on. It may not be working. Shall I use that actually? Can you hear me? Okay. Politicians, yes. So I was in politics for a few years before coming into education. I think the thing that characterises them, you may have many adjectives for them, but they are obsessed with standards in this area, what they think is standards, and obsessed with what they think is rigour. So the danger with some of that stuff, if you don't, the learner profile, if you don't present it right, is it seems too woolly, or how do you measure it, and their way of raising standards in schools is, their proxy for it is, are more students getting good GCSEs basically. So, and that's a very clunky way of doing it. So whatever they're told by employers and others, they fear that, and they also fear, and they also ratchet up Ofsted in order to measure whether that is happening in schools. So what we've got to do is reposition, and that is a sort of narrative change and a storytelling thing, using employers and others as examples of saying, well, the modern world needs something different. So the idea of rigor, you know, I think it's more rigorous for a student to be able to do all of those things and evidence it and describe themselves as a learner. That is more rigorous. You know, I always have this debate about soft skills. You know, the word soft skill for something that is so complex like creativity or problem solving, these are soft skills, whereas, you know, labelling the parts of a plant in a biology GCSE is a hard skill. Well, it's sort of not, is it? So we've got to redo the language on this. We've got to change the narrative. We've got to work with politicians. But the optimistic news is, give or take one or two ministers who happen to be in positions of power at the moment. But you know, the Conservative head of the Education Select Committee is totally in favour of this, as are lots of other backbench Tory MPs. The new Shadow Education Secretary, who we spoke to a lot, is absolutely up for this agenda. So, you know, there is growing movement of politicians and policymakers and our wider coalition who want this sort of change. And I think, as lots of people have said today, COVID is the moment where people are rethinking it. So there is a genuine opening going forward, I think.
Thanks very much.
Do I have to use the mic as well?
Yes.
I should. Okay. I guess responding to like the two questions that I posed, I find it really interesting because I come from the position of being in school, well, just finishing school, now going on to university, and still classing myself as a young person. I mean, the question is, how long do I class myself as a young person for? I'm not sure at what point I stop that. But for the meanwhile, whilst I do class myself as a young person, I think my short answer would be to centre youth voices. And it seems really simplistic, but we see today in practice and in different institutions and different spaces, it's actually proven to be quite difficult. People keep coming to us and asking us at People Power, like, how can we incorporate more youth voices? How do we engage young people? What do young people actually really want to do? What do they think? How do they feel about this? And I guess it just starts by asking the questions. My work at People Power essentially is around facilitating spaces virtually or in person and building bridges between us as young people and students and organisations, policymakers, educational leaders. And I think it's really important that we can start building that relationship between both sides so that it is a sort of collaborative approach towards transforming education and isn't something just left to teachers to do, isn't something for policymakers to be in charge of, but something that is really sort of united and collaborative. I wanted to talk about the fact that I was having loads of conversations with people today, and something that I will definitely leave inspired by is the fact that everybody in this room is here for a reason. Like, everybody in this room is doing something, and that in itself, like, if you, all of us in different organisations, different spaces, different parts of the country, if we were just in this room to come together, we could make a lot of impact and a lot of change and start accelerating this mission. And so it's just about, I guess, tapping into all the different spaces and organisations that are doing this work and really uniting, because it kind of can feel really isolating when we look at the work that's going on in education at the moment. I think there is a lot of synergy that can take place, and there is a lot of consensus when we look at, you know, what we actually really want in education. So I think, for me, it's not a difficult challenge in the sense of engaging young people, looking at how we can make spaces more democratic, and actually making sure that it isn't a tokenistic tick box exercise, but actually there is a culture of embedding young people's voices and parent voices and everybody else on board, all stakeholders, throughout every decision-making process. I'd love to talk about it more. If people genuinely have questions on how that can happen, there's loads of examples of grassroots organisations that are doing that, loads of work that People Power is doing, to really showcase how much young people's voices and their power of their experiences can actually be translated and implemented into policy and real life practice and pedagogy. So yeah, apologies for speaking really fast. I've just got so many ideas, and yeah, thank you.
I suppose on the first instance with the learner profile, I think mine was in the non-digital world, a purple folder called a personal development folder. So it's nice to know that it's going digital. I think with parents in particular, the changes already began to happen, and that happened 2 years ago when they cancelled exams. And parents then become very aware that actually it wasn't how hard their child worked, the better the grade they got. It was based around the system, and that parents, every time we put out a poll around assessment, we get the most amount of parent views on it, because ultimately parents, this is the bit that they have the most involvement in within their child's education. I know that my parents always used to tell me that the harder I worked, the better grade that I would get, and up until that point, I don't think that a lot of parents actually understood that that is not the case within our education system. I think the other way of creating change is around the pathways. So for parents, what the reason that exams play an important part within their understanding of education and their child's education is because it takes them on to the next stage of their life, which ultimately takes them on to their career, getting a job, leaving home, doing their own washing, all those kind of things that come along with that, it being an independent person. So I think a lot of the conversations that we've had here today have been around that ultimately it's about going to university. That's not the only way that children can progress and go into their career. And the only way that we're going to make change is by putting equal value on all the pathways that are there, and for parents to truly understand what each of those pathways are and how they can interact with each other. So it's not a lower class or middle class, any kind of class. An apprenticeship is open to everybody, no matter what you want to do. You should be able to go down that pathway. If you're not academic, there are other ways that you can go through. It doesn't have to all be about university. So parents are already on board with change. We know that in the assessment system, but we also know that if we can educate them more and bring up different pathways as equal to university, we will see that parents will come along more on this journey. Thank you.
Just like to say, it's been so inspirational today to hear of people just going out there, learning, trialling new things when it comes to assessment, how students can learn. I've been particularly sort of mind blown really by XP's experience of going in there and trialing new ways of learning and assessment. And really, I think that's what LIS is trying to do as well, but on the higher education landscape. And two of the most powerful things that we've been doing when it's come to admissions is actually trying to understand student stories is really important. How to understand who the student is. And the other thing that's really powerful is how do we do that in a meaningful way, looking at contextual data on students. So it's really nice to see those student profiles, because what that starts to do is to tell the wider story of the students, some of the things that you're talking about, problems that they care about, projects that they've been working on. That all helps to tell the story of the student. And any tools that are there to help students be able to do that, brilliant. We should definitely be bringing that. We should definitely be bringing that in terms of when they're applying to universities, shouting about that to their admissions, but also to people that are on faculty. I think that's also a really important part of admissions that has been for LIS a great learning from us, is that everyone is involved in the admission of these students, because it is a massive investment for them. So it shouldn't just be admissions officers just looking through these stories of students. This should be joined up with faculty and really investing in these students' learning. So student stories is really one part of this, but what I think is something that I definitely see when thinking of these student profiles is how do you read that alongside contextual data? And how do you make offers that are representative of what they've done, what their starting point in life is, taking into account all that contextual data that we know has a massive effect on their learning journey. What you don't want it to end up becoming is a good profile is someone who's gone to a school that's got teachers who are able to help get those great profiles for them. How do we read it in parallel to that contextual data, which helps us to tell this a well-rounded story? And at LIS, we're right at the beginning of that story. You know, we've done that by investing in selection days, plus looking very carefully at contextual data. And we will learn an awful lot about what works, because we're in our first founding cohort. So we're going to learn how they get on, where they go on to. But I think actually how we galvanize change is trialing things, being really brave, sharing our stories exactly like we have done today of what works, where we can have partnerships, where we can show our work of things that we've been working on, getting feedback from that. So at LIS, that's really going to be a very important part, is looking how our students get on, seeing what we can change within the admissions sector. It's a big thing to change admissions. We're very stuck in terms of how we assess students. And so I think being brave and sharing experience, sharing practices is going to be really vital. Thank you.
It's a bit like a kind of TV comedy store show, this, isn't it? It's a bit worrying because I don't do jokes. I really like Peter's quoted statement from Tim Brighouse. It was my privilege to teach his eldest son, Harry, when I was starting out my secondary career. And he was an extraordinary educator, and he might have gone on to say not just finding the gaps in the hedges, but making sure you hold hands with the right people when you've got through the gap. And I think one of the things we need to do is hold hands with the right people. And they need not to be the predictable people. If this group gets written off as a bunch of loony progressives, we're done. And I think that's where Peter was coming from in terms of just making sure that the headings we use speak probably too much and too widely. And I think your point is really well made about what I think I might think of as thinking, feeling and making in that kind of core foundational level. But we were driven by other international models. So I think it's a bottom-up series of next stages. From my mind, I think we almost need to learn from the sustainable development movement and declare a curriculum emergency, because for many of the schools I go in and the kids I see, that's what it feels like. And I think COVID has made us aware that we are in a curriculum emergency. And that just kind of turns this into a little bit more strident activism. But just as the successful sustainable development advocates have made, we use data, we use evidence. So I don't think we should put up with any of the nonsense that is put out there as fact or evidence if we know it's opinion and prejudice. We have our own, of course, and we'll trade our own, I'm sure. But I think we really need to use the evidence. And the evidence is that if you get more effective as a learner, more metacognitive, the results go up. This is not a zero-sum game. It's not, I either have that or I have this. And I think we've got to be absolutely on the front for pedagogical foot about that. Bottom up too, given that we've got a lot of commissions at the moment. I've never known that so many people apparently interested in education, from newspapers through to trade unions through to really interesting coalitions. And that's great, but they're the hygiene factors. And I think we've got to do this as a bottom-up movement, and I think that's what we're trying to do today, and that's what we're trying to do in Rethinking Assessment. I love Gwyn's Just Do It. And I think by just do it, we need to be really clear how we focus our energy on pilot activity. And we need, as Imogen was saying, we need to tell those stories. We need to get out there and make it clear in imaginative, multimedia ways. In June this year, for the first time, 15-year-olds across the world, except in England, will sit the PISA 2022 test of creative thinking, which I've had a hand in designing. And you may or may not like PISA. I didn't before I started this, but I took the poison chalice because I am convinced that unless we make an argument for the rigor and status of some of these things, they will continue to bump along the bottom. And I was very interested at the collaborative problem-solving 2015 test, which is right in the LIS territory. That has spawned some wonderful formative assessment tools. And what we're really about is assessment as learning and assessment for learning to help learners get better at whatever it is they're trying to get better at. Perhaps unsurprisingly, as part of Rethinking Assessment, I think the profile is the Trojan horse, or if not the Trojan horse, the Trojan mouse, that's going to open up some of the kind of places we want to get to. I'm really thrilled that Mike and Imogen and Vanessa, who are part of our key stakeholders there, are saying that, this is not idiotic and they might give this a go. We just need that level of engagement, and then I'll give it a go and I'll try it out. And finally, if you're with us, and I'm hoping that many of you are with us, if we can find a tone that, notwithstanding what Mike says about there being some losers, makes this a win-win activity, I think that would be really helpful. If we get painted or backed into a corner, mixing my metaphors, that we're somehow doing somebody down, whether that's a social capital or an inequity argument, I think we're stuffed. But we're not stuffed because we've got really, really good arguments here. And if you want to join us in Rethinking Assessment, Rosie Clayton is sitting over here. Do come and say hi to her. And after this event, we'll email you and you can join the fold. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Bill. Well, I feel like the kid at the end of the line who says, "Yeah, I was going to say that. All of the good points have been taken. I was just crossing them off one by. I got all of those." So I'll just say something from a kind of King Alfred perspective. We organised this today. It's part of a series of events that we're doing called Education on the Move, because we've bought the arguments that the experience is not right, and that was powerfully expressed this morning, wasn't it, by the Year Sixes and their poem, and then Alana and her reality check, and that's despite being in this kind of holistically minded, caring environment. And so we do want to do something about it, and thank you for coming and supporting this today. Thanks to all of our partners for coming and supporting us today. We do want to just do something, as you said, Gwyn, and we've started, and so I guess we're asking for your ongoing support with that and patience as we experiment. So it's about rolling our sleeves up, really, here for those of us that are King Alfred's people, and accepting that it's not easy. It's much easier to carry on doing the things that we've all done before and that we've heard powerfully from Aliyah. Feels dehumanising to an extent. And so as we kind of go forward together, not just King Alfred, but friends of King Alfred, as I hope you all consider yourselves to be now, thinking about what we can do and holding in mind that contrast. I think that really powerful contrast between Aliyah's dehumanising expression, and they haven't dehumanised you, by the way, Aliyah, quite clearly, but it might have felt like that sometimes. And then the enthusiasm with which Jack talked about his crew experience and thinking, okay, there are other ways of doing this, and they already exist, and Gwyn's kind of invented them, nicked them from San Diego. But they're there, and they've been tried, and they've been tested. So really excited to just do something with you and with Rethinking Assessment and with the wider network, because this is about building networks and raising a momentum around change that becomes irresistible.
We have got a little bit of
whether you were aware of the Steiner-Waldorf certificate that is getting children into university without doing GCSEs and A-levels. It's very fledgling, and we don't have any figures to give you. It's run by a New Zealand organisation, New Zealand International Certificate. But a number of our schools are now beginning to move into using it. And they've got into Russell Group universities as well with this. And it's a mixture of portfolio and assessment.
Okay, so they're not unrelated, those two
No.
questions. And one over here.
Yeah, it was also, I was worrying about the mental health of students, particularly if you've got to do 3 A-levels and then all of those other things. That's quite
In the learner
and
portfolio.
I'm wondering if
Okay.
Cambridge is going to accept students that don't have A-levels, but would Cambridge accept students with one of those that had maybe transdisciplinary or interdisciplinary equivalent to an A-level? Would they start looking at it? I mean, because that really seems to be the difference, is that once you start, from what I know of Cambridge, it's about, in all Russell, any Russell group, it's about an algorithm of how many A stars you've got, whether you get even looked at. I'm just, that's the question of whether they would look at something like that and see an equivalency to a different type. This student might be amazing for Cambridge, and I agree that not all kids need to go to university, definitely not, and we need to change that value. So it's just...
Mike, do you want to pick up on any or all of those points, questions?
So I think a number of things. Firstly, we talked a little bit this morning about context and how you look at a student's circumstance, and that should be something you factor in when you're considering, first of all, what sort of offer you make. And Imogen's, I think, been very articulate about how that's being applied in a different environment, but with a very similar kind of intention. But also what you also need to do when you've got them and how you support them, because there's no point bringing people in if you then set them up to fail because you haven't adjusted how you teach and learn and assess those students. So I think a lot of the stuff that we've had to do as a result of the pandemic will probably stay, and that will also open up some of opportunities there. Going to your specific question about, can Cambridge change what it's doing? I think there's a lot of opportunity with the new foundation year for Arts, Humanities and Social Sciences, which for Cambridge is taking a very radical approach. So the entry requirement is 3 Bs at A level, and it's actually not 3 Bs at A level, it's using the UCAS tariff system, so it will give students a chance to build it up over a range of qualifications that at the moment Cambridge wouldn't probably even consider for direct entry. And the bigger focus is on looking at the student's background and circumstances and thinking about the sort of assessment rather than the grades and the determinant about what you're doing. We've had the first application pool. We're in the process of assessing people for offers. What's been interesting is if we look at the demographics of that pool, it's a very, very different demographic to the students we would normally be getting. And what the exciting opportunity then becomes is we've taken the view that that first year is not about disciplinary teaching. It's not you're coming in and you'll spend a year of history to then progress into the first year of the history tripos degree. What we're doing is we're saying there's a lot of stuff we do here that frankly you'd probably find weird, like land economy. What's that about? So we're taking the view that the first year of, the foundation year is about introducing students to a breadth of different interdisciplinary subjects and trying to encourage them to think beyond the fact that they may have applied because they think they want to do a law degree, and maybe get them to realise that there might be some other things out there that might be better for them. And some of the techniques that we've heard from the examples today about ideas of having projects which are looking at data and in new and interesting ways, which may not be directly relevant to the subject you're doing, but it's about how you apply your knowledge in new and interesting ways. That, I think, gives us the opportunity to then rethink about what we're actually looking for the wider collective courses. We've also got running online rather than in person a STEM Smart programme where we are engaging with students and helping them develop their knowledge of science and technology in new and interesting ways beyond the requirements maybe of what they may be covering on the A-level curriculum, again to kind of get them to a point where when they come to apply they've had that broader exposure, which means that when we're asking them stuff at interview, it's not like, oh, well, I didn't cover that in my A-level course last week, so therefore I'm out. It's about encouraging students to take the knowledge they've got, be able to reflect on it and apply it in new and interesting that's the other thing that, you know, the sector as a whole struggles with. It's interesting that Imogen and her colleagues have kind of effectively gone for an approach where all the emphasis is on what are you able to do at the point that you've applied, and what can we learn from your experiences. I think my concern is not many universities have either taken the approach to build something from scratch or have the resources that Oxford and Cambridge have got to throw at the application process. Most universities are processing tens of thousands of applications on a relatively small operation, often with no academic input whatsoever. That's the thing that we've probably got to try and challenge.
Thank you, Mike. Imogen, or anybody else? Did anyone else want to add into that answer?
I just wanted to add as well, it's sort of going back to what you were saying, Peter, about a wider education as well, and about these choices at higher education. I think there's something about assessment, but there's also something about what higher education can look like as well that I think we need to be able to challenge. We're doing loads of great work at secondary school, but then what does that go on to do at higher education? We sort of then collapse it all again and say, well, then it's just one subject. And I think that conversation can go in tandem with the assessment piece around it, about who are the types of students who can succeed on these types of courses. So I think it's interesting to look at both of them at the same time, not just about, okay, the grades that we're asking for students, but also what are we actually teaching them at higher education, and what are the types of learners that we need to succeed on those sort of courses. So it's an interesting one to remember as well.
Thank you. And was the Steiner Waldorf qualification on anyone's radar? I saw a couple of people scribbling it down.
Scribbled it down.
Thank you. We'll pursue that further. I think we've run out of our time. Can I just encourage us all to give a big round of applause and thank the panellists